Good morning, Liberty. It is Friday morning, January 18th, 2019. My name is Michael Boldin. It is 9:30 a.m. Pacific time here on the West Coast, where I broadcast live every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 9:30 a.m. Pacific time. And I appreciate you being with me. So good morning to you, good afternoon, good evening, whenever, wherever you happen to be when you're watching, whether it's here live or in the archive. I really appreciate you joining in today, where I want to talk about, I don't really like talking a lot about myself, but this news story came up this week that kind of ties into something that I've experienced personally and then also for our organization here at 10th Amendment Center, and that is the Southern Poverty Law Center. If you don't know who they are, you should just Google them and do some research. You're going to find love and hate about this organization. But every year they publish a number of reports. A lot of times I think they're circulated directly through the FBI to law enforcement for these watch lists. I don't know if people end up there or not, but they have a hate watch list and Extremist Files. The racists, basically, they compile profiles of all the leaders of the evil organizations or individuals advocating for all kinds of supposedly dangerous things. And then we know who to go out and get, I guess. Well, an organization, a pretty prominent one in the immigration movement, Center for Immigration Studies, they want strict border control, very low immigration. They've been targeted as a hate group by the SPLC. And they just filed a federal lawsuit this week to force the SPLC to change the nomenclature that they're using about the group. So I want to talk about my own profile page that I've had up over at the Southern Poverty Law Center for quite a little time. Just share with you my thoughts so we can kind of go through it. I haven't really read it in quite a long time, so maybe we'll have a little bit of fun with this today. So before going to that, I want to say hi to everyone in the live chat who's joining me today. Of course, Logan Boydell, Scouse Jack, Larry Clark, Lazy Viewer, Aviator Tom, everyone else, I appreciate you all being here with me today. And of course, whether you're watching live or in the archive, I appreciate all the feedback. I appreciate the comments. And I appreciate people who send me emails over at team@10thamendmentcenter.com. Thank you for the reminder as well to Woodsider to remember to smash the like button if you enjoy the show, you find it interesting. If you just find yourself watching it, even if you don't think it's amazing, which I hope you do think it's amazing, smash the like button because that tells each system or platform that you're watching on to show this program to more people. I also want to say hi to Larry Clark and Ghost Soldier. Awesome. Really appreciate you guys being here. Ghost Solider, actually, I think. So that's awesome. Larry Clark says Chris Ann Hall is also considered a hate group. Yeah, so let's check this out. First of all, let's go to this article that I saw in the Washington Times on Wednesday the 16th, talking about this new lawsuit. And if you're watching here on YouTube or BitChute, BitTube, Keyport, wherever else on video, you can see the article comes up. The Washington Times is, to me, it's one of my least favorite websites to visit. Not because they necessarily have bad reporting. I don't like or love or hate really any of these real mainstream places. I just look to see what they're saying, and sometimes it's right, sometimes it's not. But what I don't like about the Washington Times is the formatting of the massive amount of ads that they have there. And I know they have to find a way to monetize, but there is almost no way to format their website where you can actually read it. So it's all off the edges here. I apologize for that. Did my best to try to format it to be able to, I guess maybe I can try to zoom out here. Let's try that and see what happens so you can actually read what I'm saying here without it. Now it still goes off to the side of the page here. Anyways, the title of the article, which you could see linked here in the show notes on YouTube. And of course, we put all of our show notes and archives over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/Good Morning Liberty. The title is Immigration Group Files Suit to Force Southern Poverty Law Center to Revoke Hate Label. Center for Immigration Studies files racketeering, a RICO lawsuit against the watchdog. So before getting into my problems with this, let's just read through some of the pieces here, just so we get kind of the facts going on. This is by Stephen Dinan, one of the most prominent groups advocating for stricter immigration enforcement, they must say, went to court Wednesday to demand a judge order the Southern Poverty Law Center to stop labeling it a hate group, accusing the self-described watchdog of running an illegal racket to silence political opponents. The Center for Immigration Studies says the SPLC's accusations that it is racist and anti-immigrant are wrong and have cost the nonprofit support and financial backing by scaring away people from doing business with the center. Interesting. Interesting. They go on to say here a little bit further, and I'm just going to read through some of these pieces so we can get just this basis. SPLC and its leaders have every right to oppose our work on immigration, but they do not have the right to label us a hate group and suggest we are racists. That's where I think they start getting a little crazier here. And this also appears, according to the report, to be the first. So the SPLC has had a number of lawsuits over the years. And they're obviously very good at this and extremely well-funded, so it's hard to beat them. But the report says it appears to be the first to mount a challenge under RICO, a law that is usually associated with the FBI's anti-mob efforts. And I would call the SPLC kind of a mafia-type organization, or at least an enforcement arm of the mob. But if you think of it like that, and my view, pretty straightforward on this, and I guess I'm probably jumping ahead a little bit, is that the federal government is a mafia organization. I mean, not run by the Italian mafia, but it acts like mobsters. They steal from, in fact, they're even worse, because a mobster doesn't actually demand that you sing its praises. They just want you to pay fealty and give it the money that they say is due to them when they're running their protection rackets. The federal government wants you to claim that it's the good guys protecting the world and advancing liberty and freedom and all kinds of amazing things, protecting people. So in a way, the idea of going to the mafia to get one of its enforcement arms, its own people, even though they're not necessarily part of the same organization, but they're definitely from that same mentality, the SPLC, is to me pretty absurd. And it can lead to some dangerous consequences in my mind. Now, the SPLC made the hate watch list, the CIS, Immigration Studies Group. They made the SPLC list in 2016. And that's the last piece that I want to get to in this article. You can see there's a lot of quotes. It's interesting. But they've been on there for just a couple of years. Now, yours truly, I've had a profile page over at the Southern Poverty Law Center since 2012. At least 6.5, closing in on 7 years. So let's take a look at it right here. There it is, Michael Boldin. With an old picture of me wearing a hipster hat. This was from an event in Phoenix in 2011, it looks like. I think that's when it was. It was myself, Sheriff Richard Mack, Stuart Rhodes of Oath Keepers, Gary Johnson, Libertarian Party guy, a bunch of different people. We were talking about nullification and ways to oppose the federal government without relying on the federal government. And somehow somebody took this picture. But this has been the featured profile image of me over at the Southern Poverty Law Center Extremist Profiles for quite some time. I'm going to try to resize this. Okay, maybe that's all I needed to do. And let's read through a little bit of this. Michael Boldin is an ideologue, and I started doing this to introduce myself at speeches and in some interviews lately, because in a way, if you're over the target, you're going to be catching flack, right? And if you're not doing anything, you don't catch any flack. So in a way, the fact that they've put me as one of the most dangerous people in the country to list on this website, then there's got to be, maybe I'm doing something right. So they said, Michael Boldin is an ideologue who has spent years promoting the idea that states can, quote, nullify federal legislation they don't like, the very same argument pushed by defenders of slavery and segregation, and just as baseless now as it was then. Now, mind you, the defenders of slavery, supposedly, if we're going with that narrative, they didn't have anything to nullify. There was no reason to use nullification because federal law said slavery was constitutional. Now, some people made the case that slavery in and of itself was a violation of the Constitution. Lysander Spooner, for example. But there was nothing to nullify. They didn't have to nullify the Fugitive Slave Act like the abolitionists in the North did, who were nullifying a federal law that was requiring people to help return escaped slaves or alleged escaped slaves to a life of bondage in the South. And anyone who's seen 12 Years a Slave, the film, this is in a way a very extreme or real example of what happened under the Federal Fugitive Slave Act. Many people who were born free were actually caught because they were claimed to be a slave by some slave owner, and the federal law said you couldn't defend yourself. You're basically just at the mercy of the system at that point. And it was northern states that refused to participate in the slavery catching of the day. So it's fascinating that they would say that the arguments that I make, which are always talking about the history of the resistance to slavery, is the same argument that was pushed by defenders of slavery and segregation. Just as baseless now as it was then. So I'm part of the Extremist Files. They did a full report called 30 Leaders of, maybe it was 35, 30 Leaders of the Radical Right, Dangerous People. And I think they included me with people like David Duke or something like that. But they say Michael Boldin is the founder and executive director of the 10th Amendment Center, an organization that favors nullification of federal laws it considers unconstitutional. Founded in 2007, actually 2006, the TAC is based on an expansive reading of the 10th Amendment, which says that those powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. Some interesting chat going on in the live chat here on YouTube. Hi to Existence, EHP Training, Liberty Cat. Liberty Cat asks, RICO? Yeah, that is a really interesting approach. I remember hearing this from Tom Woods talking about the 14th Amendment. That's interesting. I'm not sure if John Birch Society is on here. Clay Davis asks, an expansive reading. Yeah, I mean, according to their view, they want it to mean actually absolutely nothing. So anything that says that you restrict federal power then, according to people who love the monster state, would assume that literally just repeating the words of the founders is an expansive reading of the document that they proposed, drafted, and then the people of the several states ratified. So, I mean, okay. I don't think there's any slander there. I mean, they're clearly trying to paint me as a dangerous person. They try to paint the entire organization. They go on and say, Boldin describes the TAC, which offers model bills and resolutions on its website, as, quote, a nonpartisan think tank that supports the principles of strictly limited constitutional government. Boldin evidently runs the organization from his home. Absolutely. Those of you watching can see that I run the organization from my home. For a while, I did have an office in a separate location, but if I don't need to do that, I don't understand why waste donor money. I mean, the people who give a couple of bucks a month or $100 a month or $200 a month or $5 a month, whatever it may be, I try to be extremely frugal with how we do things. And I haven't owned a car in over a decade. I didn't even have a cell phone for a while. I was using this Wi-Fi hotspot that I was walking around with. So, I try to not waste funds. But as we were expanding, I thought it would be good to learn how to do some video production. And for that, I needed a studio. And I had a place to practice and learn how to do lighting and all kinds of things. But that was the only place I was able to afford that was in Skid Row here in downtown Los Angeles. And it was pretty dangerous to be walking back and forth, especially late at night. I'm dodging rats running in and out of homeless tents and syringes. And there's some crazy people jumping out at you all the time. So the first opportunity I had to leave that scenario, I did. But here, back at home, so I do run the organization from my home. I guess that's supposed to be a bad thing to be an entrepreneur, which also houses Web Stores LLC. That's an online e-commerce store that I tried to run a number of years ago that did not work too well. But as a practical matter, they say, however, TAC is on the political far right, opposing a whole array of federal laws and regulations. I guess I can't highlight. I'm going to try to reload this and see what happens. No, they don't want me to. Larry Clark says, I really like that term, the monster state. And Liberty Cat says there are some people that are legitimately on that list. Others are interesting. Yeah, and I think that's really kind of the approach that the Southern Poverty Law Center actually uses in this. You take people who are like crazy racists or horrible people, and then you mix in people like myself or Chris Ann, because then you're painting a broad brush like, oh, look at this group of extremists, hateful people. And then you can oppose policies in a broad swath, like because it's guilt by association. In fact, as we go through this feature here, they don't really say too much negative about me. It's primarily guilt by association. Oh, I've run an event that had this sponsor at it, or this person spoke at it, so therefore they must be dangerous. EHP training, Boldin looks scary with that hat. Hey, well, I mean, if that's what got me on the list, I will take it. So they say we're on the political far right, which is absurd because when the right is in power, we get a lot of opposition from the at least the establishment right, and when they're on the left is in power, we get a lot of opposition from the establishment left. You don't hear a lot from the SPLC talking about us these days, but every now and then these guys and their friends at thinkprogress.org will go after us, but it is much less now that Donald Trump is in power. And we often don't like the views and positions that the president takes. Although I'm in favor of him withdrawing from Syria, for example. I'd like to see him get out of Iraq and Afghanistan and the rest. And if he does all that, that's awesome. But we take a principled stand on the Constitution, and it doesn't change based on the political team that's running Washington, D.C. And that is not a convenient fact for these type of people. So when Obama was in power and the Democrats were running the show all across the board, of course, we would, have to be part of the political far right. When the Bush administration was in power, when the organization first started, we would get people telling us to move to Cuba. What are you with the terrorists? You're a communist organization, because we're opposing Republican policies like their foreign wars, the Patriot Act, the Real ID Act, No Child Left Behind, Medicare Part D, all these things, unconstitutional actions by that administration. So it says we've gained wide support among hardline libertarians and neo-Confederates. Of course, you can't just say hardline libertarians because you have to paint it with a racial stroke in order to get people's emotions. Now, mind you, I don't necessarily blame the SPLC for using this tactic. It's a market response. Obviously, people are clamoring for this kind of trash. Otherwise, it wouldn't gain any attention. They are... wow. We've gained support among hardline libertarians and neo-Confederates who are still angry at the powers the federal government accumulated after the Civil War that allowed it, among other things, to act against segregation. Now, that is just pure bullshit. I mean, it almost is like anybody who opposes federal power has been alive since the Civil War, and we're holding on to this anger against what they've done since then. Well, yes, I don't like the power that the federal government has accumulated since the time of the Civil War, and before then either. And I don't like it no matter who is in charge. We just want to follow the Constitution and find ways to approach it. But the idea that we're directing that against, like, in support of segregation, see, that's how they do the paint by numbers. Like, oh, let's just throw in something that most people haven't thought through and clearly will think that associate us with being a bad guy. So we don't want the federal government to deal with segregation, discrimination, and other social ills, and therefore there is no other organization that can deal with it on Earth. There's no other way other than having federal power, so therefore we must be in favor of discrimination and segregation. They point out that in the 1950s, several states tried unsuccessfully to resist desegregation by nullifying federal laws. They did try that and failed. The courts have consistently rejected nullification as unconstitutional, but they did not point out that in the 1850s, several states successfully nullified the Fugitive Slave Act to the point where the Declaration of Causes for Secession, the document put out by the South Carolina Convention, specifically cited all the northern states nullifying the Federal Fugitive Slave Act as one of their main reasons for wanting to secede. It's their words. So even if there were underlying issues behind that, they specifically put it in their document, their declaration for causes. And how you can point out one thing but ignore the other just means you're a propaganda organization in my book. The group site, they say, in another indication of its politics, rails against centrist Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg as a dedicated socialist. I wish they would have linked that because I don't remember saying that, but maybe someone has an article. That's fine. For a time, Boldin crisscrossed the country taking the TAC's nullification message to supporters known as tenthers. Its Nullify Now conferences were held between 2010 and 2013 in cities including Austin, Texas, Jacksonville, Orlando, Manchester, New Hampshire, here in Los Angeles, Dallas, Fort Worth, Chattanooga, a number of other places. And this is where they get to. So they totally paint us as being in favor of racism, segregation. I mean, of course there's going to be people who are like, oh, wow, that's terrible, if they trust the SPLC. And a lot of people do. Now, those of us watching here probably do not. But that's okay. There are a lot of people who do. Otherwise, they wouldn't keep getting the money that they're getting. These conferences that we had were often headlined by prominent figures in the anti-government patriot movement, which years grew dramatically. I don't know what that means. After the election of Barack Obama in 2008. So they're basically, the message that they were trying to put out was that the black man got elected and therefore this movement grew. And that was the message that we heard over and over and over. And I would keep reminding every time I talked to a reporter personally, I did not talk to the SPLC personally. Because I knew that no matter what you say to them, they don't care about reporting the truth. The same can be held for thinkprogress.org. They don't tell the truth no matter what you tell them. You could tell them things that they 100% agree with. And I've had this experience. And then they never publish that. They really have an agenda at hand. I've talked on many other occasions to other mainstream publications where you would think that they just want to go after you. New York Times, Los Angeles Times, Associated Press, Reuters, U.S. News, CNN. And in every one of these situations, I've at least been given a fair shake. And even the New York Times, surprisingly enough, on a number of occasions, before they published a quote of mine, they sent me an email with the exact paragraph that they intended to publish and said, Michael, does this accurately reflect what you had to say about this? And one of the situations I remember writing back say, well, I think this needs to be clarified. And they changed it. Now, the entire article was not about me, and it wasn't necessarily about our work, and it wasn't always positive, but they were respectful and honest enough to have a real discussion and to actually quote me accurately. But in a place like Southern Poverty Law Center, thinkprogress.org, and the other one I would say is MSNBC, the Rachel Maddow Show, they don't necessarily even want to hear what you have to say. They don't, like the Maddow Show, when they did an expose on the 10th Amendment Center, they spent about 10 minutes on us. They didn't even contact us for comment. They just did an attack piece. So you can't trust these people. And they want to associate. If you talk to somebody, you live near somebody, you have lunch with somebody, if they then do something terrible, then you're going to be say, well, you're working with so-and-so, and therefore you must be bad. So Liberty Cat says, record all conversations. Well, sure. But I don't know if that really solves the issue, because if you talk to them and they're publishing and their reach with a $40 million budget or $60 million annual budget is going to be much greater than me sharing with you guys here on YouTube. I mean, for the record, it's important, but certain organizations I'm not even going to touch. Liberty Cat also says neither left or right use the Constitution unless it fits their agenda anymore. Absolutely. And Logan says, don't let facts get in the way of good propaganda. Absolutely correct. So here's one of the things. The Austin gathering, for instance, featured Art Thompson. We did the Austin event back in 2011. Of the John Birch Society, who once argued that President Eisenhower was a communist agent. So They didn't say anything about what Thompson said at the event. They didn't quote him from the event. Nothing what he's done in modern times, but he's bad because in the past, he once called somebody a communist agent. I mean, that's, if anyone is like, oh my goodness, he once said such and such. He called a president a bad person or dangerous. Maybe who knows? I mean, I don't know how that in and of itself makes you an extremist, but Stuart Rhodes, head of the conspiracy-minded Oath Keepers, a group that encourages police officers and soldiers to disobey unconstitutional orders. Now, mind you, if it was like draft dodging to get out of Vietnam, which I would also support, I think they wouldn't have said that this was conspiracy-minded or bad to encourage people to disobey the draft. Also, Kevin Gutzman, who is a constitutional scholar and a published author of many books, a Top Jefferson book, a Madison book, a history of the Virginia Ratifying Convention. This guy is like, he's a scholar. I mean, you may not like what he has to say, but to consider him a radical extremist, and then, of course, my association with Kevin, who I consider a friend, then makes me even worse. Kevin is a professor of history at Western Connecticut State University and the author of Politically Incorrect Guide to the Constitution also spoke. But so far, no one here is saying anything that's racist or in support of segregation or, quote, other social ills, just calling Eisenhower a communist agent. Maybe they like communism, so the fact that you call somebody out as a communist agent, whether true or false, is somehow bad. Now, of course, my good buddy Tom Woods really is the one that wins it there because they hate Tom. They absolutely hate the guy. He's a former member of the neo-Confederate hate group League of the South and author of Nullification, How to Resist Tyranny in the 21st Century, was another constant on the Nullify Now tour. It's fun. Basically, we're bad because we associate with people. So now Liberty Cat says, Beto O'Rourke saying the Constitution is outdated is okay, of course. And this is a good comment from Sean Marr, 1738. Trump is a Russian agent. Right. So JBS, Art Thompson was bad for calling Eisenhower a communist agent, but tons of people can call, that's a great one. They can call Trump a Russian agent all day. I mean, if you look at the news or if you're on Reddit today about Trump supposedly ordering his subordinates to lie, this is just from an investigative report. They're basically saying Trump is a Russian agent over and over and over. That is a great analogy. I don't think we'll see the Southern Poverty Law Center listing all the mainstream media sites as extremist files for this. So our partner in the endeavor in this tour of events, we did maybe 10 of them, was the Foundation for a Free Society, which doesn't exist anymore. Maybe it does. But it was run by my friend Jason Rink, which espouses the libertarian free market theories of Murray Rothbard and the Austrian School of Economics. Foundation leader Jason Rink has described the federal government as the primary threat to liberty. So basically, as long as if you say the federal government is dangerous, then you're the danger, according to these people. And maybe that's the realization that we can come to here. If you can prominently make the case that the danger isn't about one political party or the other, like, oh, it's just the Democrats or it's just the Republicans, but you make the case and you effectively make the case, and people are drawn to this, that it is the federal government in and of itself that's a threat to liberty, then, of course, you're an extremist and a danger to the established order. In June 2012, Boldin called the U.S. Supreme Court's decision to uphold President Obama's healthcare law, quote, an assumption of undelegated powers, showing that, quote, evil is advancing. I was making the case, and I still do, that the states and the people should follow the strategic advice of people like Thomas Jefferson and James Madison. That is, when the federal government assumes undelegated powers, as Jefferson put it, its acts are unauthoritative, void, and of no force, and a nullification of the act is the rightful remedy. So I'm just literally, should we just scrub them from the history books? I know they want to scrub all history and start anew, or just reframe the history because history is written by the winners. So they don't want us to point this out. Jefferson said it. So I can't literally just repeat Jefferson's words. Otherwise, it's bad. And when I was talking about evil is advancing, it's because in Madison's Virginia resolutions of 1798, he said that the states were duty-bound to interpose to arrest the progress of evil when the federal government does a dangerous, palpable of exercise. He wasn't as aggressive as Jefferson, but he was saying when the federal government takes a dangerous, palpable exercise of powers not in the compact, the Constitution, then the state should arrest the progress of evil. And I'm saying that this is an evil. Even if you were taking the Madisonian perspective, the more pragmatic approach, the slower approach, you could still see the Affordable Care Act as an evil that was taking over swaths of power that were never delegated to the federal government, and people were supposed to arrest that progress. Of course, they don't want to say that I'm basically repeating the father of the Constitution's advice in regards to this, because then people would say, okay, well, maybe his analysis is stupid, he's an idiot, but to just put it on its own like that, I think they want to make that case that President Obama, it was based on race. It's because as soon as Obama came in, then all of a sudden there was a problem. And now Obama is evil. And they say, following the lukewarm reception of the Nullify Now tour, they say. Lukewarm. I mean, we had about anywhere from 200 to 600 people per event. Generally, it's like 300 to 400, which I think for a dude who is I guess a failure running some organization from their apartment, laughable, is doing pretty good to be able to go to 10, 12 cities around the country and have hundreds of people show up. And in fact, it's so lukewarm that they had to highlight me and the 10th Amendment Center as one of the 30 dangerous leaders of the radical right back in 2012. So it was so lukewarm that they spent all this time putting together this report for law enforcement around the country. So after that Boldin tour turned to crowdfunding in 2015 to pay for his, they've updated this over the years, to pay for his Teach 150,000 People to Nullify campaign. This campaign was established to get out of our echo chamber and aggressively teach new people about nullification as a solution to our problems. Created an online video series. And then they haven't updated it since 2015. The fundraising effort continued in 2016. So basically they're saying, oh, we're just trying to do what we're doing, and we're raising funds to teach more people. So there you have it. Leader of the radical right, part of the Extremist Files. I just want to point out that a lot of people have actually asked if the 10th Amendment Center would also get involved in a lawsuit against the federal government. And again, I think this is dangerous to me, because if we're talking about a time when social media platforms are engaged in, whether you call it censorship or deplatforming, and then people calling the federal government in to do things, we're only thinking short term with all of this. If you only think short term, then yeah, maybe if I can convince the federal government to do blank, then I will get what I want right now. But if you don't always approach things like with the thought of what could they do with that power in the future, then you're engaged in a very dangerous activity, because that's where it becomes most problematic. I mean, you could force, not necessarily that it's really easy to do, but let's say you could force government to do whatever you want. You get a libertarian dictator to force liberty on the entire country. Well, that means you've established a precedent that this centralized power figure can make a decision on all kinds of things. That's why we don't want the federal government to have any involvement in the right to keep and bear arms, including, I do not want the federal government to be able to force on the states reciprocity, for example, because that means someone in the future has the power to make a decision about reciprocity, and they could take it away from the states completely. The better path is to convince people state by state that this is the right way forward. And we do see a lot of reciprocity agreements popping up around the country, and that's very positive. So I also think it's dangerous because if the federal government can force the Southern Poverty Law Center not only to stop calling people what they want to call them, but then they actually have to put a statement. I think there was a line on here. Yeah, the center says, here's what it says from Washington Times. The center says it wants a judge to award damages and order the SPLC to remove the hate label, and it wants SPLC to affirmatively state on its website that the CIS is not a hate group. I don't ever want the Southern Poverty Law Center to say anything positive about the 10th Amendment Center. That's the death knell. Like, if they want to do a good underhanded trick, that's probably the best way to do it. Because in this climate, we have to realize at some point that there's propaganda all over the place. And when the propaganda organizations are attacking you, those are the ones that you should pay attention to a little bit more. Like, how do we know that we're doing a good job if we're not being attacked by these people? So I don't want the federal government to stop that, because at some point, someone is going to use the federal government to get somebody else to stop something. And I think it's a very, very dangerous game as we get involved in having the mobsters go in with the point of a gun and tell people what they can and can't say. I mentioned this to a friend on Twitter recently, Daniel McAdams of the Ron Paul Liberty Report. He was pointing out that, man, I hate to use the ban hammer on tweets because somebody was just savaging him, just being just crude. And he's like, I hate to use the ban hammer. And I said, I not to detract from the basis of this conversation, but I'm in favor of the ban hammer. I like muting on Twitter. I like blocking people because this is the free market tool. If we say that the markets are supposed to work and we don't need government to come in and protect us from things that might hurt our feelings or it might hurt our ears or are offensive or whatever it may be, if we need the government to do that, if we want to say that the free market works, we have to show that the free market works. We can filter out the junk and the horrible people that we don't want to hear from. If we don't use those tools, people are going to demand that somebody else does it. And when somebody else does it, then you're going to have all kinds of other problems. So I don't want the government to come in and protect me from the Southern Poverty Law Center. I don't want the government to come in and force them to say something positive about the 10th Amendment Center or me personally. I like the fact that, we'll put it on record. I like the fact that the Southern Poverty Law Center did this. About a year before that, I actually wrote a short blog. It was basically titled, What's a Guy Gotta Do? I've been touring the country telling people to disobey every federal law on the books just about, and you don't have us listed on your Hate Watch page. So they ended up following through. Maybe I asked for it, but if they've kept it there for nearly 7 years now, and I wear it as a badge of honor. I hope you guys see it that way too. So before we head out, let's take a quick look over in the chat. Lazy Viewer says, no federal executive agency can be taken seriously. I like that Trump is a Russian agent. Beto O'Rourke saying the Constitution is outdated is okay. Believing in the Constitution makes you a sovereign citizen. Liberty Cat, I listen to Tom. I agree with EHP training. Healthcare is not an enumerated power given to the feds. And we're also trolling SPLC. I appreciate all these comments. This is a fun conversation. But I hope you're enjoying this. I hope you found it interesting. Of course, if you did, or if you are having fun with this conversation, you find it insightful, it's just a good show, whatever it may be, make sure to smash that like button, hit the subscribe, whatever platform you're on, leave some more comments, share it with your friends. That all helps a great deal. And before we head out, I just want to share this quote from George Washington. I guess this will make us an extremist as well, because this is no joke. And I'm just reading George's quote. And he was talking about the pillars of the constitutional structure. And the reason that they exist is, quote, liberty is the basis. And whoever would dare to sap the foundation or overturn the structure under whatever specious pretext he may attempt it will merit the severest punishment which can be inflicted by his injured country. So again, I hope you enjoyed the show. I really appreciate you spending some time with me today. Again, if you like what we're doing here, make sure to smash that like. I hope you have a wonderful weekend, and I'll see you next week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, here at 9:30 a.m. Pacific time. Have a great weekend.